You cannot just go to Antarctica. That is the first thing people do not realize. You cannot book a flight, land wherever you want, and walk around. There is no country, no government, no open airport you can enter freely. If you show up without proper authorization from a treaty nation, you can be removed. If you break the rules while you're there, your own home country prosecutes you when you return. The continent is 14 million square kilometers, bigger than all of Europe, and almost none of it is open to you the way any other landmass on Earth would be. There are only a handful of places where tourists are allowed to set foot, all of them clustered along the Antarctic Peninsula, all of them managed by a framework of rules that 58 nations agreed to and maintain. And the deeper you go, the inland ice, the hidden lakes, the rock faces no human has ever stood on, the more tightly controlled it gets. This is not a rumor. This is the documented legal structure of the coldest place on Earth. The question is, why a place with no native population, no history of human settlement, and no territorial owner needs this level of international regulation just to be visited? And the answer, when you lay out the full timeline, is stranger than most people expect. If you value documented, factual science and history like this, subscribe right now. It is the best way to support this work. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. This script is built on primary research from two specific sources that most people have never encountered. The first is the study titled Miocene and Pliocene Ice and Air from the Allen Hills Blue Ice Area, East Antarctica, published October 28, 2025, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, authored by Sarah Shackleton of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and John Higgins of Princeton University, both funded through the NSF Center for Oldest Ice Exploration, known as COLDEX, a 14-institution American collaboration that has been drilling ice cores in East Antarctica since 2021. The second is a study published March 15, 2026, in Geophysical Research Letters, authored by Daniel Goldberg of the University of Edinburgh, the paper that used satellite-calibrated models to project ice loss from the Thwaites Glacier in West Antarctica through 2067. These two papers, from opposite ends of the continent, from opposite directions of time, tell the same story. Now back to the story. Antarctica was not discovered until 1820. 3 expeditions from 3 countries spotted it within weeks of each other. The British, under Edward Bransfield, the American sealer, Nathaniel Palmer, out of Stonington, Connecticut, the Russian naval officer, Fabian von Bellingshausen, who had sailed from Kronstadt with 2 sloops in July of 1819. All 3, separately, within the same Antarctic summer. And then, for over a century, nations picked at the edges. They planted flags. They made competing territorial claims. Britain claimed one wedge, Norway claimed another. Chile and Argentina both claimed overlapping zones, including slices that overlapped each other. By the 1940s, armed men were already firing at each other down there. In 1948, Argentine military forces shot at British troops in a disputed zone. The continent had no people and might have started a war. That is when the United States stepped in, but not gently. August 26, 1946. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Chief of United States Naval Operations, announced Task Force 68, Operation High Jump. 13 ships, 4,700 men, 33 aircraft, including helicopters that had never been tested in polar conditions. It was the largest military expedition ever sent to Antarctica. Its stated purpose was cold weather training and aerial mapping. Its unstated purpose, confirmed later by historian Diane Olson Belanger, writing in Smithsonian Magazine in 2007, was to establish an American territorial claim over the largest possible area of the continent. Congress had approved the funding. It was a naval operation, not a scientific one. The expedition mapped approximately 1.5 million square miles of coastline. They took 70,000 aerial photographs. 6 Martin PBM, 5 Mariner flying boats operated from seaplane tenders, 6 Navy Douglas R-4D transport aircraft, naval versions of the DC-3, flew off the flight deck of the aircraft carrier USS Philippine Sea using JATO rocket bottles strapped under their wings, landing at Little America 6 hours later. They built a temporary base called Little America 4 near the Bay of Whales on the Ross Ice Shelf, complete with 3 compacted snow runways. The first flight over the South Pole from that base happened February 15th and 16th of 1947. On December 30th, 1946, a Martin PBM-5 aircraft called George 1 had already crashed on Thurston Island, killing 3 crew members. The other 6 survivors were rescued 13 days later. The expedition was planned to run 6 to 8 months. It ended in late February, after barely 3. The official reason cited deteriorating weather. No detailed technical report explaining the early withdrawal was made public. Admiral Byrd, who organized the operation, though Rear Admiral Richard Cruzen commanded it, gave one interview after returning. He said the most important lesson of the entire expedition was that America could no longer take shelter in geographic isolation. He said the world was shrinking in ways that threatened American security. He was likely referring to Soviet overflights possible across the polar route. That is the most reasonable reading. But the interview was given to a Chilean newspaper, El Mercurio, in March of 1947, and for decades it has circulated in versions that strip out the Cold War context and make it sound like Byrd found something he was not allowed to describe. He almost certainly did not. But the ambiguity is real. The classified portions of the photographic results from high jump have never been fully released. Then, on December 1st, 1959, 12 nations signed the Antarctic Treaty in Washington. Argentina, Australia, Belgium, Chile, France, Japan, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, the United States. Cold War enemies who were pointing nuclear weapons at each other in the same years. All of them, together, agreed to demilitarize and share one continent. The treaty came into force June 23, 1961. By 2024, 58 nations had joined. Article 1 banned military operations. Article 5 banned nuclear tests and nuclear waste. Article 7 gave each signatory the right to inspect any other nation's stations at any time, without prior notice. That last clause is remarkable. No arms control treaty before or since has included unannounced inspection rights across an entire territory. The United States has conducted 14 official inspections since 1963. It has never found anything it could not explain. The tourism rules came later. In the early 1990s, commercial tourism to Antarctica was just beginning, a few hundred passengers per season in the early years. By 2024, over 100,000 passengers annually were traveling to the continent. 98% of all tourism voyages go to the Antarctic Peninsula, the narrow arm pointing toward South America. The International Association of Antarctica Tour Operators, founded in 1991, sets guidelines its members follow voluntarily. No more than 100 visitors ashore at any landing site at one time. Mandatory biosecurity checks, strict waste rules, minimum 5 meters from wildlife. No non-member operators bound by any of it. Enough rules to feel managed, not quite enough rules to guarantee anything. In early 2023, a tourist vessel attempted an unauthorized landing on Deception Island, a volcanic caldera and protected historic site. Over 150 passengers came ashore without biosecurity screening. No international authority had the power to stop them in the moment. The consequences were handled by the passengers' home countries afterward. That is the system. It is genuinely unusual. A continent nobody owns, administered by a treaty nobody is forced to join, policed by nations who have agreed to do it voluntarily, for a continent that may be the most strategically important piece of real estate on Earth. 90% of the world's ice is here. 70% of the world's fresh water, frozen. 379 subglacial lakes have been identified beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, connected by a hidden network of channels that silently move water and lubricate the movement of glaciers above. Lake Vostok alone, buried under 4 kilometers of ice near Russia's Vostok Station, is the size of Lake Ontario in North America. Scientists believe it has been sealed from the outside atmosphere for between 15 and 20 million years. In 1999, microbes were found in ice samples from just above the lake. Organisms alive in total darkness, at 350 atmospheres of pressure, feeding on chemical energy alone. Beneath the Antarctic ice, geologists have long estimated enormous reserves of coal, oil, and rare earth minerals. A United States Geological Survey assessment once estimated the Ross Sea region alone could hold over 500 billion barrels of oil, though this has never been confirmed by drilling, which is prohibited under the 1991 Protocol on Environmental Protection. The minerals are off limits until at least 2048, when the protocol is eligible for review. That review date is not a coincidence, it is a pressure point. And China, which joined the Antarctic Treaty in 1983, has been building research stations on the continent steadily ever since. But here is what all the access control and geopolitics has actually produced in 2025 and 2026. Not secrets, evidence, older, stranger, and more consequential than anything a conspiracy theory could generate. In the Allen Hills region of East Antarctica, a remote blue ice area roughly 6,500 feet above sea level, closest to New Zealand, Sarah Shackleton and her Coldex team drilled between 100 and 200 meters into the surface ice, far shallower than normal because the terrain pushes ancient ice upward. They pulled out cores. They measured an argon isotope trapped in air bubbles to directly date the ice. The result, published October 28, 2025, was 6 million years old. That is the oldest directly dated ice ever found on Earth, more than double the previous record of approximately 2.7 million years. The air sealed inside it has not touched the outside atmosphere since the Miocene epoch, before modern humans existed, before our species was even a faint biological suggestion. Inside those 6 million-year-old bubbles is ancient atmosphere, direct physical evidence of what the air was like when Earth was significantly warmer, when sea levels were higher. Oxygen isotope analysis of the ice shows Antarctica has cooled by approximately 12 degrees Celsius over those 6 million years, the first time that cooling rate has ever been measured directly from the ice itself, rather than inferred from sediment. Coldex director Ed Brooke at Oregon State University said they had hoped to find ice 3 million years old and were floored to reach 6. His team plans to keep drilling at Allen Hills between 2026 and 2031, looking for ice that may be even older. That 6 million year old air is the thing. It is sitting there, in a box, in Denver, Colorado, where the NSF Ice Core facility stores the samples. Ancient atmosphere, retrieved from the most tightly controlled continent on Earth. Then there's the Thwaites Glacier, 120 kilometers wide, the widest glacier on Earth. Its basin covers 192,000 square kilometers, roughly the size of Great Britain. It was first identified in January 1947 from the air during Operation High Jump, the same mission that ended early with no explanation. For most of the 20th century, it was just a name on a map. Satellites changed that. Since the 1990s, West Antarctica has been losing an average of 82 billion tons of ice per year. Thwaites alone is responsible for 4% of global sea level rise right now. It is losing ice more than 5 times faster than it was in the 1990s. In 2026, a research team from the UK and South Korea hot water drilled 1 kilometer straight down into the main trunk of the Thwaites ice shelf, the first time anyone had done that, and deployed instruments to send real-time data on what warm ocean water is doing at the grounding line, where the glacier meets the seafloor. Dr. Peter Davis of the British Antarctic Survey described what they would see as data from a place that has never been directly observed. The instruments send readings daily via satellite. The study published March 15, 2026 in Geophysical Research Letters, led by Daniel Goldberg of the University of Edinburgh, ran 2 independent ice sheet models calibrated against satellite measurements of how the glacier surface is changing in height. The result? By 2067, Thwaites Glacier alone could be shedding between 180 and 200 gigatons of ice per year. That is equal to what the entire Antarctic ice sheet currently loses annually, 1 glacier, matching the entire continent. If it collapsed completely, sea levels would rise 65 centimeters. For every single centimeter of sea level rise, roughly 6 million people globally are exposed to coastal flooding. That number does not mean collapse is coming next year. The glacier contains 600,000 gigatons of ice total. Collapse, if it comes, unfolds across centuries. But the trend line is pointing one direction. Frozen. Accelerating. Aimed at every coastal city on Earth. Back to the access question. You cannot go there freely, and yet the information coming out of it now, from the 6 million year old air in Denver to the grounding line instruments on Thwaites to the March 2026. Discovery by the British Antarctic Survey's Tom Jordan that pink granite boulders on the Hudson Mountains were deposited there by a glacier resting on a hidden granite mountain nearly 100 kilometers wide and 7 kilometers thick, buried beneath Pine Island Glacier. All of it depends on exactly that controlled access. No commercial extraction, no industrial contamination, no competing territorial factions fouling the data with geopolitical interference. The restrictions that feel like secrecy are also what makes the science real. The Antarctic gravity hole was confirmed in a study published March 7, 2026 in Scientific Reports by researchers from the University of Florida. Antarctica sits over a region of Earth where gravity is measurably weaker than normal. Alessandro Fort at the University of Florida traced it to slow shifts of rock deep inside the planet over tens of millions of years, using earthquake data to essentially build a CT scan of Earth's interior. The gravity anomaly strengthened between 50 and 30 million years ago, the same window when the continent's massive ice sheets were forming. What happens inside the Earth may be why the ice formed here, and what happens to that ice will determine coastline elevations for billions of people. In 2026, we are drilling into 6 million year old air. We are watching a glacier tear apart from the inside in real time via satellite. We are finding hidden mountains under ice, using physics equations and pink rocks as a trail of crumbs. We are measuring a gravity hole large enough to influence how the entire ice sheet formed. On March 23, 2026, a study led by Earl Wilson of Stanford University, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, traced Antarctica's sea ice expansion from the 1970s through 2015, and its sudden sharp collapse, to a slow battle between increased precipitation forming a low salinity lid on the ocean, and stronger winds driving upwelling of warm, deep water from below. For decades, precipitation won. Then, the warm water broke through. The ice record was hiding a wave that had been building for 50 years. The continent is restricted, inspected, managed by international treaty, and it is giving up facts so old and so consequential that the restriction may be the only reason any of it survived intact long enough to be read. The 6 million year old air cores are sitting right now in Denver, Colorado. They were drilled in the Allen Hills, a place most people have never heard of, in one of the harshest field seasons on Earth, by a team that expected to find ice 3 million years old and found ice twice that age, carrying ancient atmosphere from a warmer world that no longer exists. The last time Earth was this warm before, the evidence was sealed in ice by a continent no one owned, under rules no single nation controls, in a place you still cannot freely visit. The ice remembered.